All right, good afternoon. Welcome to this month's cybersecurity webinar. Go ahead and get started here. Today, we're going to be covering cybersecurity tools and where do they fit into the small and medium-sized businesses. Really excited to kind of start the year off fresh with some new topics. I know we spent a lot of time last year on CMMC, which is extremely important for a lot of our clients. But this year, we're going to focus on a lot of varying topics. Kind of starting things off with the cybersecurity tools specifically and where they're fitting into these small to medium-sized businesses, and then moving on to different technologies and services, et cetera, throughout the year that I think you guys will find interesting and useful, regardless of what industry you operate in. Quick background in case you haven't joined. My name is Jerry Craig. I'm the CISO for Ntiva and run the security department for Ntiva, serve as the virtual CISO for some of our clients. My background is active duty Marine and then DoD contractor supporting military health and the Marine Corps specifically for over a decade. And then the last 7 years before coming to Ntiva with CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So a lot of DoD, a lot of healthcare background in my past. So we're only going to cover a few topics, but there'll be a lot of content in these topics. We're going to cover the challenges that your market space has specifically, why Ntiva markets specific tools and technologies and services, which if you're a client with us already, you will have heard about a lot of these, but maybe wonder why we're choosing them, why not something else. Maybe you've heard another name or another vendor or another type of technology solution, and hey, why doesn't Ntiva offer this? If you're not an Ntiva client, this is a great way to kind of get your feet wet into some of the things that we offer and why we do it and our rationale behind it. So that, as you're out there looking for a potential partner, you can see what we offer and why we do it and compare it to others. Some of the common products and services. And then I wanted to give you a quick breakdown of one service and from an in-house perspective and outsourced services perspective, because I do get a lot of people that come to me, whether it's in the CISO role or just they're a client that has a particular service or set of services. And at some point they reach that phase where they say, am I big enough to where I shouldn't outsource this anymore and I should bring it in-house? And I wanted to give you a real world scenario of costs that I've seen and vendors that I've seen so that you can kind of gauge for yourself, how big do you really need to be before that becomes a reality? And then as always, any questions that you guys have, feel free to throw them in the chat. I've got a second window, which is why I'm looking up periodically to see if you guys are posting any questions, and I'll try to stop and address those as they come up. So I wanted to start with the challenges and some typical constraints. And I've got a couple graphics here. I'll be honest, I'm not a PowerPoint wizard, but I wanted to give you some graphics to help illustrate some of the points here. And most people, when they come into security, feel like it's this hurdle they have to go over, but it's not a very big hurdle. It's just, hey, I have a compliance requirement and the compliance department's beating me down about this, or I realize security is a problem and I need to do something about it and I need to spend some money, but I don't know how much. When in reality, what they find is it's like this massive wall that's almost impossible to break through or get over. The irony here is you're trying to build a security posture that has an impenetrable wall, but to get to that point, it seems like you're going through massive numbers of hurdles to even stand up a security program, get your services deployed. And most of the time that comes down to cost and time as far as resources are concerned. So when we talk about small businesses, we're going to cover about 5 different topics on each slide on average. The first one here being your smaller operating budgets. Normally, you're going to have a smaller budget. There are going to be those outliers that, maybe you're security focused or a security company or an IT company where security is a larger focus, or you have a smaller risk appetite that's going to drive up how much CapEx and OpEx dollars that you spend. But understand that you're typically going to start with a smaller amount compared to a large enterprise, and you somehow have to make that budget stretch further than someone with an almost unlimited budget. You're going to have to deal with a lack of skilled IT and or cybersecurity personnel. One, there's simply more jobs, more demand than there is supply. And two, when you get into some of the smaller niche areas, you can't go out and just find a generalized cyber person or an IT person to meet your needs. If you guys aren't familiar specifically with cyber, but you have a lot of experience in IT, that's the same thing as going out and saying, well, if I was going to hire a systems administrator, but I really need a database expert because I have to get off an old legacy system, you're not just going to go out and find that that random generic person that knows how to do that. So you're going to have to find that skilled labor, and you're going to have to pay for it. Typically, what I've seen in my experience in small businesses is that you need numerous skills. So you might need the equivalent of, say, 10 or 20 different people from a skills perspective, but you certainly can't afford to hire 10 to 20 people, and you're looking for them in a single full-time employee. Maybe you get lucky and you can hire 2 employees. The reality is that, at least in the cybersecurity arena, you're not going to find that unicorn. The highly skilled engineering type folks are skilled in those areas, in a specific area, on purpose. That's what they love doing. It's marketable. They make a good, good living. They're not going to branch out and try to learn too many things, because the jack of all trades just don't seem to work well. If, however, you happen to find that person, or someone that checks off 7 out of 10 boxes, the salary and benefits package that you would have to pay will price them out of the market. I can tell you that I've seen people who are asking for 5, 6, 7 different types of skill sets, and they're wanting to pay the equivalent of one mid-range security person, and it's just not going to happen. So that becomes a barrier for you. You're also going to have potentially expensive compliance requirements. We saw with our CMMC base that the DoD has put out requirements that are expensive to meet if you don't already have a good security posture, in addition to the fact that you have to go out and potentially pay for a C3PAO to certify you. Same thing occurs if you're in healthcare, you're in the finance industry, you take payments of credit cards, things like that. You may have an expensive compliance requirement that automatically chews up a portion of your budget. And to be clear, compliance and security are not the same thing. We can put a lot of compliance items in place. We can check off a lot of boxes for controls without truly making anything more secure. And then most clients that I've dealt with, I would say, have a desire for enterprise grade security products, but these products are priced for enterprise customers. So when you go out and look at a Gartner report for the upper right quadrant, or you talk to a friend, or you come from a really large organization and then move to a small organization like a startup, you may be familiar with the names of the vendors and tools that you had, and you know that they're world-class solutions. And then you move into the small to medium-sized market and you say, well, I want that same product. The problem is that these vendors aren't pricing things for you at that space, because they spend a lot of time and money in research and development. They want to recoup their costs. They're going to go try to land the big fish like the federal government, where a single sale might equate to 20 or 30 small business sales. So they're just simply not going to offer it in your price range. The other thing is they've gotten smart and savvy over the years, and they don't necessarily offer models that are user-based. So, as an example, you're a 10-person company. You say, well, I need this product, but it's only for 10 people. And instead of offering you a per user license that would be affordable, they offer it on a throughput basis. And now maybe you're saying, well, it's how much bandwidth am I going to send through this device? And it's 100 times the bandwidth that you need, but that's their entry level model. So you have no choice but to buy it. And by default, that prices them out of the market for you. So you've got a lot of challenges. I think you have, for the most part, the same challenges. So folks that are listening to me, I don't think it matters what industry vertical you live in. It's more about the size of the company and the operating budget. You're all sharing the same set of core challenges. And there's probably 50 to 100 challenges that I could put on the screen, but I wanted to limit it to say 3 to 5, because these are the most common, and I think the biggest hurdles that you're going to have to overcome if you want to move forward. So why does Ntiva pick certain things? There is a method to the madness that we have. Obviously, we have to be profitable. We can't offer solutions just because they're best of breed that either you can't afford or we can't turn a profit on. That's a given. So put that aside. Talk specifically about affordability. You have to be able to scale. You have to have a low cost to get into the market, and then you have to be able to scale. As I was just saying in the last slide, if the product that we're offering has such an enormous cost just to get it implemented, then you're not going to be able to afford it. Vice versa, you might be able to afford it for a few number of users, but what happens if your company grows to 300? Can you afford to pay 300 times whatever the cost is on the license per user? So we've got to come up with solutions that grow and scale with you. And every year, your operating budget isn't doubling and tripling, at least on the security side. What we do is utilize a good, better, best model. Our goal is to be in that better plus range as much as we can. If there's ever an opportunity to kind of get a best in breed solution for an affordable price, we will. That's a given. If we absolutely have to go down to the good side, we will. Usually when we do that, it's, look, there's a niche requirement. Let's say CMMC or ISO certification says you have to do something. And we know that whether you like it or not, the entity that you work with is forcing you to have the solution, even though they haven't chosen the vendor. Look, we're going to give you something so you can check the box and not break the bank. Is it the best thing out there? Obviously not. But the cost of good, better, and best sometimes is just exponential. I'll show you, like I said, with the pricing model, but I've personally seen where going from good to best could be 20 times the cost. And just like anything else, run any analogy you want, shopping for a new car, there's a car that costs $30,000 and there's a car that costs, $100,000. Obviously, the $100,000 car is going to be perceived better than the $30,000 car by most people, but what is it you're getting? If you can rationalize what you're getting for the price, then by all means, spend the money. We, again, have a hard time in the small business space doing that because many of these vendors that we work with, they start with a core product and then they'll shift and offer additional features so that they can grab up market share or prevent losing market share. And when we deploy it, let's say the tool has 30 features, you use 2 or 3. How can you justify paying for the other 27 or 28 features, even though they're there and they're good, if you're not utilizing them? We need to be able to deliver a return on investment for you. So one of the most difficult challenges that you have in most organizations, regardless of size, is when you start to talk about finance and how much of the budget you will get to use on IT and security specifically, and then going and proving that the money that was spent last year was beneficial and that you should get at least that amount or more the next year is very challenging. And in security specifically, the way we provide most of our return on investment or value is we go to whoever we're speaking with in the organization and we say, well, we didn't suffer a breach. That's a difficult thing for people to wrap their heads around because yes, they understand they spent X number of dollars and there was no breach, but if they had cut the budget in half, would they still have gone without a breach? One example I could give is, and this is a real world example I dealt with, I was working with a healthcare organization and we were working on some solutions for them. I don't remember the cost, but for argument's sake, let's say it was going to be a $100,000 investment. And they could not wrap their heads around, why should I spend the $100,000? At the same time that I was there visiting with them, they had a project for $1 million to replace some brick fascia on the outside of their building. And the IT and cyber staff, would come to me and say, I can't understand how we can't get $100,000 for this tool to protect healthcare data, but we can spend $1 million on resurfacing the building. I thought that was an interesting question and a real world scenario that was occurring while I was standing there. So I went and spoke to the finance folks and they said, well, a brick fell off the building and it landed on the ground. Luckily, it didn't hit anyone. We calculated if that brick had hit someone, we might have to pay $10 million in a claim. So for them to spend $1 million to not spend $10 million on a claim in a real world scenario that was happening as we spoke was clear as day. They wrote the check. But when I asked them to spend $100,000 on something that may or may not ever happen, and I couldn't really prove if what I was spending the money on prevented it in most cases, they couldn't wrap their head around it. So I think this is something that you all are going to have to deal with. We deal with as well. So when we bring you these tools and technologies and services, we're bringing you ones that we think we can show you the value right then and there. What you do with it is on you, but we're giving you the data to be able to go back and show I spent X number of dollars and look what I got for that money. And then there's going to be, mandated regulatory compliance requirements. I've mentioned CMMC, ISO already, high trust in the healthcare space, PCI DSS. We have to provide certain tools and technology and services because our clients who have compliance requirements absolutely need someone to provide that. And why shouldn't we provide that for them if we're providing their IT support? So there's going to be a bucket of folks that just absolutely need certain things and we have to provide it. A large portion of our client base today doesn't have a regulatory compliance, but I think If you've worked in any industry long enough, you're seeing that every year, more and more industries are now going to, from nothing to voluntary kind of attestations of your security posture to new cyber questionnaires, cyber insurance forms, and then mandates. So if you're not regulated today, I would anticipate that you will be at some point, or vendors, insurance providers, customers, partners are going to start requiring you to fill out forms. And how many of you are going to want to say no to a lot of the questions if you want to keep a good partnership or business relationship? And then we kind of do what is referred to as the Pareto principle or 80-20 rule. We realize that 80% of your cyber needs can be met with 20% of the solutions. And the Pareto rule isn't specifically written for cyber, but it's adapted by virtually every technology and industry out there. But it's the same approach from us. We know that there's about 90+% of the attack vectors that come from a small number of sources. So phishing attacks, unpatched systems, for example. Those two things alone make up more than 90% of the known attacks that are reported. So if we can focus our effort and say 20% of our money and work, we can knock out 80% of that. That's the approach we take to try to save you money, and the solutions that we choose are aligned to that model. So let's talk about some common products and services. Now, all of the ones that I'll list on this page are ones that Ntiva provides. Other vendors provide some combination of these, so we're obviously not the only ones out there. But I wanted to show you some of the things that we offer on a recurring basis as well as non-recurring. The idea here is you want to plot how much value something's bringing with against how much it costs you. One of the nice things with the non-recurring cost model is that, yes, you have to shell out some money up front, but it's one time and you're done. And this is really important when you're talking about your strategic planning, because you budget for the year that's coming up, whatever your fiscal year period is. But invariably, what I've seen is when the fiscal year starts, most organizations kind of put a hold on money. They'll spend a little bit, but the majority of things that you ask for, they just get a pause, let's say for 3 months. The logic behind it being, if I run out and spend my money and then something comes up that I didn't plan for or I forgot, I won't have it. If I hold off for a few months, I've got a larger pool of money. I get through part of my year, and then if nothing bad has happened, now I can release those funds. The other thing that happens is you consolidate, you become more efficient, you change vendors, and there's always little pockets of money left at the end of the year that we all know you have to spend, or they'll reduce your budget. If you can identify these non-recurring services and then put them as a seed in someone's ear, and all of a sudden at the end of the year, someone says, well, I've got $10,000 that needs to be spent. You might have 2 $5,000 projects that you've already planned for. You can knock them out, and again, it's non-recurring. You use the money once and you get the value. So think about that as we talk about some of these services and how that works in your environment. So some of the most common with the recurring monthly costs are what we would call endpoint protection and response, or EDR. This would cover antivirus, anti-malware, and some of the advanced feature suites. Now, to be clear, I didn't write antivirus on here. It's a matter of semantics for some people. In the tech world, there's a clear-cut difference in the language. Antivirus is specifically a feature. It's providing antivirus protection. But in your typical EDR suite now, antivirus is just a function or subset of the entire suite of services that it provides. So when you move up to a more advanced product like an EDR solution, you will get antivirus, you get anti-malware to help protect against ransomware. You may get other features like being able to disable USB support and things of that nature. Scanning and looking through encrypted data, for example. So all of those things get wrapped up into an EDR component. And it's probably the most important and first thing that any company should buy, so that you can get something on your assets, whether it's a server, workstation, laptop, whatever, mobile device, to get you covered, that baseline protection. And as I said before, keep in mind that the lack of vulnerability remediation and phishing are the two most common attack vectors that make up 90% of or more of our attacks. You'll see that both phishing and vulnerability scanning are on here. Why is that? The human is the weakest link in all aspects of security. It always has been, probably always will be. Phishing prevention cuts that down tremendously. Both in the federal space and in the private space, I've noticed that when you start a campaign program, you're probably going to get double-digit percentage clickers in your organization. A good average that I've seen is anywhere in the 10 to 20% range. So pick your personal organization, how many people you have. You don't have this protection today. The first time we run this campaign, imagine up to 20% of your employees will fall victim and click on some link, attachment, etc. This doesn't even include the SMS space where you're getting text things to change bank accounts and stuff like that, strictly the email. Now, over the course of 6 months to a year, we'll definitely see it drop into single-digit numbers. And I would say on average, most of the customers that have, let's say, more than 50 people in the organization can drop it down to 2% or less. In really large organizations, I've seen it drop to under 1%, like 0.5. It's a little harder if you're a 10-person company, because if even one person clicks, then you've got a 10% failure rate. So it's easier as it scales, but you can see that in the course of a year, for a low-cost solution, you can eliminate a large portion of your risk. Dark web monitoring, where we're scanning and looking for accounts, compromised accounts that are on the dark web, easy, simple service. Vulnerability scanning is a big one. Now, what I'll call out about vulnerability scanning, though, is that vulnerability scanning in and of itself is only one piece. The remediation is the more important part. So vulnerability scanning gives you visibility. The remediation piece gives you the due care and due diligence that is expected in case you're breached and you have to defend yourself in court from liability. To say that I knew about all of my vulnerabilities and I did nothing about them isn't going to help. Also, not getting vulnerability scanning so that you can play ignorant or use denial as an answer, that no longer plays in the courtroom. So there was a point in time where you could say, if I just simply didn't know about it, how could I be responsible for it? But with all of the legislation that's come out, all of the frameworks that are built, they all include vulnerability scanning and remediation. So there's no way to get around that. And then last but not least, the multi-factor or two-factor authentication. One of the simplest things you can do. I can't tell you the number of times that my team and others work with clients on security incidents, email accounts being hacked, just security incidents in general, and multi-factor was either not enabled or wasn't a solution. Just such a simple thing that can correct and stop these attacks. And then the two that I wanted to list for non-recurring, these are penetration testing and risk assessments. These are the types of things you only really need to do, periodically. Maybe it's once a year, twice a year, depending on how poor the results are. But it just gives you that baseline of where am I, and am I getting better over time or not? And again, from a compliance requirement perspective, a lot of clients must go out and get an annual third-party risk assessment or just some form of risk assessment. And almost always on cyber forms, a question will be, do you perform penetration testing? So we can provide that for you if you want to get a baseline of where you are and see where you're susceptible. And again, start doing your budget planning for the next fiscal year. And then last but not least, I wanted to walk through the in-house and outsourced costs real quick. So I'm using the example of a system information and event monitoring service, or a SIM management service, excuse me. If you wanted to build one in-house versus if you wanted to outsource it to someone like Ntiva or another vendor. So I gave 3 ranges here. These are ballpark figures, but they are ballparks based on legitimate solutions that I've implemented and sold. So they're not made up numbers for the sake of adding cost. Low, mid, and high speaks to 3 different areas. How big your environment might be, how complex your environment is, where the environment is, and then what you're willing to spend on your employees. So application cost is the actual product, the SIM solution that you'll buy. There are some very cheap ones out there, all the way up to really expensive ones. On the $50,000 end, that's the lowest option you can buy. So again, this is one of those places where I said at the beginning, it doesn't matter if you're 10 people or 100 people, the vendor won't sell the solution under a certain size. You may only utilize 5% of that solution, but you're still going to pay $50,000. You then have to factor in your annual server and storage costs. So that's 12 months worth of server and storage. If you're going to pay for professional services to have it implemented, because you may not have the person on your team that knows how, some form of employee training, whether it's certification, OJT, working with the professional services group. And then 2 types of coverage. Do you only want one employee who offers 9 to 5, Monday to Friday coverage, or a 24/7 model? The 24/7 model incorporates 5 people on that line item, but total it takes 6 people. So we'll be adding both of those bottom lines. The 6 people is to cover nights, weekends, holidays, and at a minimum, you need 5 people to work it out on a schedule, but no person can take PTO, get sick, have a day off, a holiday, anything without a gap in coverage. So you actually need a 6th person. So under that scenario, if you were to go out and pay for 24/7, you could see your first year ranges anywhere from $400,000 to $1 million. The annual recurring is slightly less because you don't have to pay for the professional services and the employee training after year 1. You may reinvest in more training for your employees, but again, it's not a hard cost that you have to pay. If you were to go with the 9 to 5 option, you're looking at roughly $100,000 to almost $300,000 a year. Now, again, this is where people are saying to themselves, well, I might be a 100-person company. Maybe I need to bring this in-house and maybe I can save money. Well, let's look at if you were willing to go with 9 to 5, at a minimum, you're going to have to pay probably $100,000. But let's be honest, you're not going to want an entry-level SOC analyst. You're not going to want the bare bones. You're probably going to be in the mid to high range. And now you're looking at a couple $100,000 investment. Looking at outsourced though, and I only put a 24/7 model because most vendors, including Ntiva, do not offer just 9 to 5. There's no point offering protection for only a portion of the day. You don't pay the application costs, server costs, services, training, etc. You pay a flat rate. So again, the flat rate for the 24/7 coverage is the annual cost. You're going to pay anywhere probably from $15,000 up to $60,000. And again, to get up in the $60,000 range, you're talking about large environments, large on-premise environments, hybrids with cloud, lots of employees, lot of data, those kinds of things. Most people, truthfully, that we deal with in the small to mid-size range are going to be in that low to mid range. So for $15,000 to $30,000, you can cover the same service that you would have to pay anywhere from $400,000 to say $700,000 to do yourself. And again, if we're talking about a small business that might only spend $20,000 a year on security, $15,000 is a lot more economical than $400,000. And again, I wanted to throw this up there because I know a lot of folks don't know what go into the costs and how difficult it really is to stand it up themselves. But the number there for $1 million for a 24/7 coverage, that's pretty accurate to stand up the basic SOC, believe it or not. So again, you want skilled people. You don't want to have to pay to retrain them. So consider $1 million cost to save 15, 20, 25K a year. And I put it down there again, just it's kind of like a repeat. So, but both sides of the slide match. 24/7. The same recurring fee each year because you're not paying for professional services or training. So you're just paying that one-time cost. The other nice thing about this is you can estimate and plan and forecast your costs year to year. Will there potentially be increases over time as you grow, as vendors raise prices? Yes, but it's a very minimal cost. If it goes from 15K to 16K a year, probably not a problem for an organization. If you had to jump from 400K to 600K a year, big problem. And again, I did not put a 9 to 5 model on there because outsourcing, that's just simply not offered or not recommended. And on that, I will stop there. I hope that's been helpful. I've been watching. I don't see any open questions, but if there are any last minute questions, please throw them in the chat. I'll be happy to address them. If there are none, thank you for attending and look forward to speaking with you next month.